Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night. It's Friday, August 12th at 7:25 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on a sweltery, unusually warm day. And this is the almost daily ZenCast. We're back from summer hiatus. And now for your opening blurb. A quote from Harlan Ellison. Quote, "You are not entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to your informed opinion. No one is entitled to be ignorant." A scathing critique of our postmodern political situation. Although I full disclosure, I have no idea who Harlan Ellison is and when or where they said that. I just came across it on the social medias and thought I'd add it to the list. Welcome to the show, folks. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. I just said that. Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Hello and namaste, and thank you for joining me. This is the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo speaking to you live on Sprecher.com from iHeartRadio and across a multitude of podcatching apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, GeoSavan, and many other applications where podcasts can be found. Thanks for joining me. I've been away on summer hiatus, and now we're back. And I thought, we'd ease back into it, nice and gentle. This first episode, back to it. So let's not get too caught up in any current events or metaphysical discourse. Let's jump into a little bit of DJ Zed, fresh and hot off the animatronic disc jockey's electro meta music making machine. Here is Generations Next Level Funk, a G-House Volume 2 Remix Live audio animatronic entertainment discotheque synthetica track for your entertainment and audio pleasure. Excellent drop, my friend. For those of you secretly wondering, yes, it is okay to wiggle and or dance out loud along to the music. an ancient tribal wisdom meme recently expressed? Dance first and think afterwards. This is the appropriate order. Part mini mental dance party, part 90s styled talk radio program. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. For those of you wondering, no, I don't spend a lot of time preaching about Zen, because that's not how you do Zen. But those of you who might be interested in my opinions and discourse about Zen-like topics, there is no lack of episodes already in the catalog. I humbly encourage you to dig deep and poke around and discover for yourself. And of course, fear not, because I always come full circle and revisit topics as time progresses. Welcome to the show, folks. I'm excited to be here. For those of you who are not entertained by the music and or the prolonged intro, I apologize. But here we are. This show, by the way, comes with a few warnings, which include its unorthodoxy. This is a real, raw, and radically unscripted, top-of-my-head improvised talk show. No one's telling me what to say. No one's writing teleprompter doodle dads for me, because it's just me, a struggling content creator working under the creative license pseudonym of Mr. Zeppo. If you'd like to find out more about the online content creation hustle, please do visit solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. And if you appreciate the music on the show, head on over to soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo and enjoy the audiophonic entertainments without me jibber-jabbering all the way through it. Okay, enough of all that. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you to all of you who've been listening. Despite the fact that I've been on hiatus, the numbers are heartwarming. This podcast is listened to in 25 countries around the globular toroidal living planet, commonly referred to as Earth and or dirt and or stone and or Mother Gaia, depending on which universe you reside in. There's a lot to unpack, friends, because the summer has been, at least in the current set of interdimensional time frames that I'm sort of trapped in, quite busy with all kinds of political ridiculousness, as well as some spiritual hijinks and the usual cornucopia of totally unnecessary and irrelevant conspiracy theory content. Not the least of which has been all the bizarro statements made about who built the Georgia Standing Stones and who destroyed them and why. But put a pin in that. We have already briefly addressed that, and I'm sure we'll come around to talk about it again. But please be advised that the mystery about who commissioned the stones has been officially solved, and it quite clearly debunks most of the more outrageous conspiracy theory content out there about it. And for those of you who are not unaware, I don't have the name of this guy on the tip of my tongue, but you can find it pretty easy. A documentary from not too many years ago, I mean, it was relatively rather recent, so it's understandable why many people have not gotten the memo. But a documentarian who set out to prove, I think, one particular conspiracy theory, and I don't remember which, because there are way too many to keep track of, and I have interests elsewhere. But from what I understand, based on my very limited ability to research, because I'm just one person, I don't have staff, although I aspire to one day. The individual who had a pseudonym which was known, which I also do not have at the tip of my tongue right now, who commissioned the Standing Stones in Georgia, was actually a late middle-aged, white, Caucasian, American doctor. I think he self-identified as a Christian of some variety, but to the best of my understanding, had some known sympathies and light affiliations with the generally unacceptable social club known as the KKK. Let me be very clear for anyone tuning in for the very first time. Racism is real. Yeah, it's more complicated than the usual public discourse allows for. And its solution is not to be found either in legislation nor in individual or group violence. I'm going to put that out there. Just going to put it right there on the table and move on, because I don't think there's much to discuss there. For those of you curious what my solution to such complicated and thorny issues might be, stay tuned, because there's a lot of correlation. But I digress. Okay, so the Georgia Standing Stones was something that sort of kicked off the summer season, right as I was like, I should really need to do a summer hiatus. I think I talked about it briefly on a sort of half slapped together episode not too long ago. But much more recently and much more interestingly, to me, is of course the developments in the department I usually cover under the subtitle Good Morning Trumptopia. For those of you who are extremely new to this show, I sort of use like subtitles as ways to sort of organize some of my thoughts. And I'm the first to admit that my thoughts are highly disorganized. This is a totally real, raw, radically unscripted, straight off the top of my head, improvised talk show. One which might someday in the future have a 1-800 live anonymous phone line where people can call in and stuff, or some sort of internet equivalent. Not there yet, but you can help us get there. Simply by tuning in and listening to the show either on Sprecher.com or one of its affiliated distributory platforms, and enduring the advertising involved, because that's how the ad revenue is generated. That's the only way that I make any money. And to be clear, friends, despite the fact that this podcast is listened to in 25 different countries around the world, it's not making me like lavish lifestyle regular money. It's barely even paying for itself. But that's not important. I'm not complaining. I don't do it for the money. Would I like to be able to afford to do this full time because of this show? Absolutely. Would I like to also cultivate a large, engaged, dynamic audience that has things to say and discuss live on the air? Absolutely. And I only say that not to self-promote, but rather to encourage you to tune in, because part of the summer hiatus was spending a lot of mental effort contemplating, how to tackle the podcast and all the other projects that I'm juggling between now and the end of the year, to sort of make an effort to bootstrap all of it into a broader audience place. And so I humbly thank you. Your participation is deeply appreciated. Your thoughts and commentary are also welcome, but I would like to note here that any sort of hate speech, etc. at all, especially anything that borders on the infringement of my rights as a public speaker, will be called out for what it is and subsequently blocked. But I'm not here to tell people what to think, okay? I am here to share my thoughts about things, and I do speak with confidence. I will be the first to acknowledge whether or not I've been able to verify an item, and I will discuss things that I've yet to be able to verify. For example, the quote earlier, which was my awkward transition to that quote. Ignorance is a human phenomena that is quite fascinating. And the uninformed opinion is something that is currently kind of wildly popular and trending. And that isn't to say that there's something, in a snobby way, that there's something better, but rather this is an issue that should always be checked, right? In the sort of like, let's challenge this and think about it. Let's also be the first to admit that it is physically and intellectually impossible for any given individual to validate and verify in a meaningful, like legitimate way, every tidbit of information that comes across their awareness. Okay? Now, this is the catch-22 that is one of the... excuse me. There I go, trashing my voice within the first 16 minutes of the first episode back from hiatus. It's amazing. I can talk all day in real life, but for some reason when I sit down to do it on the podcast, I'm doing it in a way that's like aggressively glottular. That's not the right word. Well, it might be the right word in some other dimension, but it's not the right word in this dimension, I don't think. Guttural? I think that might be closer. Anyways, I'm trying not to ham it up and do that radio voice too hard because that's what hurts my voice. Okay, sorry for the personal digression there. One might argue, and I say this in the broadest sense and with zero judgment, because I'm not about hating on other people or groups of people, right? People often accuse me, I may say, if I may go on another personal tangent for a brief minute, people often quite wildly accuse me of hating such and such demographic or another, in large part because they have little else to contribute to the discourse at hand, and so they have to like try some sort of personal attack tactic. I actively, and I mean, obviously that's not the case. Sometimes it's clearly a misunderstanding of what I'm saying that kind of makes a certain degree of sense. When I speak about what's going on in the world, friends, for those of you who are new to the show and or, just need a refresher, I'm purposefully trying to address the ideas and not any individuals particularly. Unless, of course, they're public figures that have put themselves out there, and that there is a sort of civic duty to call out and poke holes at, their demeanor, their character, their behavior, and their actions. For the purposes of saying, hey, that's not all right. Doesn't mean I hate the person, right? Any given public servant exposes themselves to public criticism and oftentimes unwarranted public hate. And that's increasingly becoming a hyper-normalized phenomena, in part because, and here we come back to this the opening blurb, it feels to me, as an observer of cultural broad stroke phenomena, I tend to try to look at a meta view of things as opposed to get lost in the weeds. Although getting lost in the weeds can be fun, especially if it's actually weed. But that's a whole nother issue, right? Put that on the corkboard because we'll come back and talk about that on Cannabis Talk, I'm sure. From a broad picture perspective, it feels as though it appears to me to stray away from using feeling words, because then that gets into a very thorny patch of easily dismissed or easily dismissible statements. It appears to me, as an observer, that tries their individual best and acknowledges the human failings inherent therein, to remain as objective and nonpartisan as possible. That there is an active effort to cultivate the entitlement of the uninformed opinion as some sort of superior alternative to a moderately to well-informed opinion, right? Just as there also seems to be a concerted effort at a cultural level to cultivate a snobbery about the supposedly hyper-informed opinion. And within each of these problematic arenas, there is the creation of silos wherein, the snobs differentiate themselves in terms of their snobbery, and the uninformed differentiate themselves and argue about themselves within the sort of boundaries of their convictions, regardless of how well or underinformed their opinions that they have convictions about may or may not be. And this leads to the kind of tribalistic us versus them. Never mind that there is an active effort to cultivate us versus them ideological thinking, ideologically driven thinking. It all compounds, all these efforts that appear to be happening. Now, the big question is, who's conducting these efforts? To a certain degree, from my perch, from a broad view perspective, it's almost irrelevant, right? Because we're all inculcated. We're all part of the problem. And I include myself in it. I don't pretend to be superior or free of, glass houses throwing stones, not going to do it. We're all in a glass house. Because of the way our cultural system works. Because of the way the human species perpetuates its ideation or its ideological constructs. No one escapes brainwashing, friends. And then either they realize that there's brainwashing going on, or they're manipulated into believing that there's only brainwashing going on over there. But if there's one hard pill to swallow in our postmodern context, regardless of our affiliation, regardless of our political context, and regardless of what nation state we're analyzing this from, it's that all sides are being pelted with manipulative content, ranging from the absurd to the incredibly mind-blowingly sophisticated. There is no apparent, virtuously free of such corruption team or group or political party, right? Now, in these here beautiful United States of America and or Trumptopia, depending on what side of that fence you're on, there is this delightfully duopolist echo chamber of echo chambers. There's, left versus right and right versus left. And like I was saying earlier, in any postmodern us versus them dichotomy, each group believes that they are the righteous group. And then even within that, there's fissures and fractures because silos are created, right? I mean, the really blatantly obvious example right now, if I may call out the Republican Party, in part because they're currently the most egregiously, flagrantly sort of obvious example. But there's siloing between those who insist that the Republican Party must now distance itself from the 45th former president of the United States, and those who are clinging to the delirious fantasy that he somehow deserves and or has already secured for himself, because it's a cornucopia of different beliefs there, the next term in office. Setting aside any analysis of the incoherencies in the Trumptopian theoretical environment, we need to zoom back, right, and remind ourselves of certain key factors, if I may be so bold as to suggest, before we can take any effective action. And I think that there's a fundamental commonality in all of our issues as a society, as a collection of societies. And that's that everything's been dragged through the muck and turned into this phenomena of us versus them, ideologically driven tribalistic thinking, where it doesn't matter which group you belong to, everybody else is wrong. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't buy into that, right? I can't do that with organized religion. I can't do that with a political party. I can't do that with a nation-state identity. I can't do that with any kind of subdivision of any of those things. And curiously, people call it out in other groups, but they tend to turn a blind eye, broadly speaking, to the phenomena in their own group. Especially if they're really wrapped up tight in like self-identifying with the tribe. Now, it isn't as neat and as simple as the left is righteous and true and superior to the right, or vice versa. Although people still caught up in those modalities would try to argue that this is so, and or accuse others of thinking that way. For example, I openly criticized Donald Trump, and clearly, because of the egregiousness of his actions, both leading up into office, during office, and his disgraceful exit out of office, those entrenched in the thinking that they must defend him for all the reasons that they believe that, clearly jumped to the most ridiculous assumptions about me because they're thinking through this ideological us versus them indoctrination, right? And I'm not saying that to judge them or to call them sheeple. That's just what people do. It isn't just them doing it, friends. The left does it. Everybody does it. Atheists do it. Spiritual people do it. Religious people do it. It's a human behavioral trait. Not a problem of that tribe or this tribe or those tribes only. So we get caught up in these treadmills of argumentation. And we don't actually solve any problems. Sure, there's baby steps here and things, tangible or completely sort of symbolic that get achieved. Some of those are really great. Some of those are really not so great. And everyone's got different opinions about all of it anyways. As exemplified by the severely alarming move by the Supreme Court of the United States of America to strike down Roe versus Wade and quote-unquote give that decision back to the states. Now, I already did an episode about that, I believe, and I'm probably going to come back full circle and do another episode about that, I'm sure, as the issue is only going to sort of get bigger as more and more states take action and as more and more time goes by. But let me cut to the bone real quick and just say that freedom isn't freedom if you're forcing people to adhere to a moral code that they can't agree with. And I understand the other side's argument. As a former member of a Christian organized religion, I get it. But as someone who's questioned organized religion, as well as Christianity specifically, and has had to make the real life choice to step away from it because of its own problematic issues, which we could spend many an hour discussing, I have to come back and make the difficult decision that, it's not my place to tell any woman what to do about that situation. Unless, of course, I'm intimately involved. And then it becomes a different choice about what my choice is, how much of a choice I have, et cetera, right? As an individual, potentially participating in that sort of choice. But politically, culturally, it's none of my business. Therefore, the only thing I can rationally support in terms of legislative decree is that decision must be reserved to the individual mother who is making the decision in their life, in their personal life. And if that means they're going to choose to go with their religious conviction or otherwise, that ain't none of nobody else's business. Plain and simple. Someone asked me on social media, like, how do we support both sides? And I'm like, that freedom of choice is supporting both sides. Yes, I get it. The pro-birth movement believes it is a religious moral issue. And the one delightful meme with dear Madam What's-Her-Face, Madame, not the wrong kind of, but what's the right, it's not Madame, it's, there's another one. Anyways, I forget her name anyways, but that actress whose everyone hears her voice when they see the meme. Religion is fine and good, and I'm probably butchering the quote because I don't have it in front of me, but religion is fine and good to have, but religion's a bit like a penis. Sorry. I should have maybe given, a word alert before running into that. But, if you haven't seen this meme, you should. It's fine to have one, but the moment you start waving it around in other people's faces and trying to shove it in places it doesn't belong, it becomes a problem. Or as a different meme puts it, because I am particularly commenting on the situation here in the United States of America. The United States of America is a place where you have the freedom to practice Christianity or not. That's what freedom of religion means. You have the freedom to practice any religion or no religion at all. To pretend that freedom of religion is anything else is pure brute hypocrisy. Why am I talking about this as opposed to the other things? It's all interconnected, because if there's one thing that was clear and evident is that Donald Trump, when choosing to run as a Republican, also chose to solicit, court, attract, depend on the support of two particularly intensely weird voting blocs here in these delightful United States of America. And that's the ultra-extreme right Christian movement, which has really awkwardly uncomfortable overlap with the white nationalist movement. So from my perspective, all of these issues, which become these treadmills of argumentation, have a deeper root source, and that's the American movement to enshrine, as if it had always been meant to be, the idea of some sort of pseudo-Christian theocracy. And, well, I mean, the facts are the facts. And we can do a deep dive into that if you care to in a future episode. But bottom line, it was never meant to be such a thing. And freedom of religion, I don't think, protects such an idea or such a movement. Just like freedom of speech does not protect the issuing of violent threats or of the incitement of others towards violence, right? It never has. So, complicated as all of that may be, we will never solve it by yelling at each other, as dreadfully tempting as it may be. And trust me, I know that from personal experience. Let's talk about how we can move forward as a community of communities in a solution-based manner instead of all this arguing is my central position, right? Not from a leftist perspective, and it's adorable how many people think I'm a leftist. I'm not. not from a rightist perspective, and it's disturbing how many people think I am when I'm really not that. But from a transcendental perspective. Not some sort of organized religion, not some sort of mystical cult, but the literal idea of transcending our own malarkey, right? Transcending our own ideological constructs. Transcending the limitations created by these wedge issues that are engineered, apparently, to keep us busy fighting instead of solving the problems that we ourselves create. And that, my friends, is the perspective from which I ground all my discussion. Whether I'm analyzing the current events of the day or sharing with you the rough draft development of my science fiction, action, adventure, literary fan fiction of all things video game and cinema, that's where I'm like rooted from, right? And so I hope that no matter where you're coming from, dear audience member, we can find some common ground. Now, stay tuned. I'm going to wrap this show up with the last bit of music, trying to keep it nice and tight and under 45 minutes. As we tackle the challenge, as I tackle, I sometimes use the royal we, even though it's totally just me, because I'm trying to include you, my friends. Because even though you're just sitting there listening, we are actively doing something together in a sort of time-displaced kind of way, but still together. And that's that you're welcoming me into your mental inner theater of the imagination, and engaging both your ability to imagine things, right, based on the words and sentences that I create, and your critical analysis of the critical events, of the current events and ideas out there in the world that are involved in what I'm discussing. And to that end, I hopefully intend, to come back to the sentence I was trying to say, I invite you humbly to please join me as I tackle the challenge of doing this show a little bit less almost and a little bit more daily. And now to play us out, here's a DJ Z Entertainment audio, digital, dance, groove, mechanical track entitled Endless Summer Grooves, a groove pad sunshine indie orchestration of audio electronic music for your booty to groove to. SoundCloud.com. I wasn't going to play that whole track because it's a bit long, didn't want to bore you to tears with it, but also I wanted to wrap up this episode before it went beyond the allotted time I expected to go. Friends, the world's a mess, and there's too many problems to even take account of. Never mind attempt to legislate or badger each other into a consensus through this endless loop of argumentation. But there is something wild and crazy that this crazy hippie dude over here would like to suggest that we maybe, just maybe, take a look at. And this will sound crazy, I know. Trust me. I've been doing this podcast for 5 years, and I'm well aware of what some of my statements may sound like to some people. But we won't fix any problems by fighting each other, arguing each other, going to civil war or international war, as is exemplified for the last bazillion years of human history. We might just solve some problems if we do the antithesis of all that. And in one word, dear friends, that is healing. Now, of course, I know, I get it. There's snake oil salesmen and shucksters and shills and all kinds of reasons to doubt. But there's also all kinds of reasons to investigate it, individually and collectively. Dear friends, that's what this show's all about. And I don't pretend to be some kind of perfect, elevated, awake, spiritually superior person. That's a whole lot of malarkey. That's exactly the kind of stuff we need to transcend. So please be advised, if you're already a spiritual person and you're coming to this show because you heard he talks about spiritual stuff, there might be a few things that I've got to say that might rub you the wrong way. For example, ain't nobody awake, my friends. If we're going to drop deep into the spirituality box, one of the biggest, ridiculous, most silliest things going on in that arena is that people have apparently forgotten or never found out what it is we're supposed to be awakening from. And now lots of people are patting themselves on the back for being awakened, enlightened, woke, all kinds of words. But reality itself, dear friends, according to the ancient mystics, according to what people like Buddha and Jesus and others actually said, or at least, what's the oldest versions of what is attributed to them having said. Because let's be really blunt about that stuff. We don't have anything that with little exception, we have very few documents that were actually written by the people that they're attributed to having said, right? But I digress. There seems to be some congruency, some mutually supporting set of wisdom statements scattered throughout all of the ancient religious texts if you look back far enough. And that's that this place itself, if we must awaken from something, this reality itself, not in it's a computer simulation kind of way, because that's way postmodern and a bit absurd if you really, really pick it apart. But we'll put a pin on the corkboard for that, because we can do a whole multi-part episode about that and ramble into depth about it. And to short circuit all of that, if it were, I would argue, and have argued in the past, will argue again in the future, that the same theory applies if it's a high-fidelity simulation of reality itself. Reality itself is the dream from which we must awaken. Right? Okay. But whoa. What does that have to do with politics? What does that have to do with Donald Trump? What does that have to do? How do you connect all of them? So many dots that must be connected, friends, that can be connected, and that's why I implore you to tune in, both in the future and in the past. Join me in upcoming days as I come back with more, and of course, dig deep into the 5-year catalog of episodes that you can find on Sprecher.com or any of its outlets. As always, friends, it has been my honor and pleasure to share with you my wild and wacky thoughts. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you soon. Oh, by the way, if you're curious, I'm going to be ramping up to full throttle. Monday, August 15th is the day that I scheduled to try to go hardcore with the multiverse known as the Zeppoverse. If you're curious, you want to find out more, head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and check things out. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your minds and hearts, dear friends. Remember to be good humans to one another, even when you're fed up with each other's malarkey. And I know that's tough. Trust me, I struggle with it in my own life, both politically and interpersonally. But that's one of the deep, deep needs that we have, to really sort of transcend our own malarkey so we can transcend each other's malarkey. And one surefire way to transcend malarkey is to turn inwards and focus on the healing that is deeply needed. I'm at 45 minutes and 55 seconds. Boom, gotta go. Thank you so much, friends, for tuning in. I will be back at you soon. And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily ZenCast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. P.S. If you gotta hate on that tagline, it ain't no skin off my nose. You should ask yourself why you gotta be hating on that tagline. I think it's, haters gotta hate. And when they gotta hate, it says more about them than it says about what they're hating on, usually. Just put it out there. Signing off, this has been the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.